Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to have you guys on the webinar. Thanks for making it out today. And we're going to continue on the 7 tools of Envision. And today we're going to focus on this tool called Stimulus Response. We've been kind of jumping around tools. We haven't been going particularly in order. We've been kind of flowing along as, just kind of been led and as the team has needed certain elements. And Stimulus Response is really what I want to focus on today. And for those that are on the webinar right now versus just calling in, you've got the slide up where you have the teacher with the ruler, you've got the parent yelling at the child, you've got a little neuron firing. And if you guys remember me teaching on this before, we understand that neurons are our brain cells that fire together, wire together. Neurons are brain cells that fire together, wire together. And what this means is, in science, it's been proven that memories, and especially those memories and those thoughts that become habitual behavior patterns for us, end up becoming like a clump of neurons in our brain. It's like all these little brain cells start connecting. The little tendricle ends of our brain cells start reaching out to one another and kind of knitting together, and they form a cluster, and that cluster becomes a very strong, emotionally embedded belief, memory, or thought process. And so the more that we have stimulus stimulating us in a certain way, and the more that we do a certain action or think a certain way, the stronger then that behavior pattern, that thought becomes. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that certain activities throughout our lives have conditioned us. Stimulus response is about conditioned behavior. And what that means is there's certain things that we do in life that we don't really make choice in the fact that we do it. It's not like, okay, somebody just yelled at me, so now I'm going to do this, and you think it through. It's like, okay, they yelled at me, so now I'm going to go, sit in the corner and pout, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. It's just we're led to do it. Everything in our emotions just wash over our brains. We're like, for me, often it's when my wife and I get in an argument, and part of what's been patterned for me over the years is just to go quiet, go sullen, get the 1,000-mile stare, and just wait for the storm to pass. And that's just been a learned behavior that's been very difficult for me to break through. Now, there's times I'm able to make good choices, break out of that, continue in the conversation, and be engaged. But if I'm not having a good day, if I'm feeling stressed, if I'm feeling overly attacked, even though my wife never attacks me, if I'm feeling attacked or anything like that, then it's very, very, very difficult for me not to go into that same pattern again. When I get the stimulus of my wife fussing at me or someone displeased with me, much like what you kind of see on the screen with the teacher wagging the ruler or the parent yelling at the child, my response, and my reaction, more to be clear, has been to just pull away, get quiet, get sullen, and just wait for it to pass over. And the challenge becomes, if we could remember the needs continuum, where we look at how we discover our lenses, we basically look at our needs, then the rules and the emotions, and then the action and response and behavior that comes from that rule and emotion. Then that produces a result, which gives us feedback over time. And what I found about my stimulus response pattern is it's not meeting my needs over time. Pulling away, becoming despondent, not really engaging even in a conflict or argument process. While short term I get to be in somewhat of control, I get to have it my way, I get to pout and be solemn, the long-term feedback over time is not engaging does not serve me, because really avoiding it, pulling away, all of those things really don't help me. That doesn't really serve me. It doesn't really get me more of what I say I want. It actually just reinforces and pretty much guarantees that the situation is going to come back up again. And so let's bring this into context of our businesses as we work home-based business, as we work our network marketing company, as we get in there and recruit and go out and get customers and we get other coaches and things like that. How does this apply to that? Well, we have certain stimulus It's time to recruit. It's time to approach a customer. It's time to reach out to someone. And then there is a response or a reaction. And we'll talk about the difference between response or reaction. Really, the negative part of it all is stimulus reaction. What we want to get into is stimulus response, being able to respond, being able to make a choice to make it different. And so in our business, we're often delivered multiple stimulus. Now, what is a stimulus? Stimulus is any piece of information, anything communicated to us, either inside of us or outside of us. What do I mean by that? My example that I was using is my wife communicating to me from the outside. We're having a conversation, an argument, whatever, and she's saying words to me. That stimulus is coming from the outside in through my ears, what I'm seeing through my eyes, into my brain. Then there's a secondary stimulus, which is my self-talk. We talked about this last week when we looked at emotional state. Once you focus on something, when I'm focusing on this conversation, this argument I'm in with my wife, then there's a self-talk that triggers, and there's a physiology to triggers. And you guys can begin to see how these things are intertwined. When we talk about emotional state, when I'm focusing on that disempowered state, and I go into a self-talk of, oh boy, here we go again. Then my physiology gets into the 1,000-mile stare, and then my focus becomes, when is this going to be over, and is this ever going to end? And my self-talk does all of that. I begin to drill myself a nice little hole of negative emotional state. And so stimuluses come at us from the outside and the inside. It can be the government, it can be the economy, it can be our checkbook, it can be a person, it can be a sunny day, it could be a flower, because there's positive stimulus. There are things that come to us that we actually automatically respond and treat as positive. There's something about a sunny day to me. A sunny day outside with freshly mowed grass. I guess living on the golf course all of those years and mowing, when I'd wake up in the morning and there'd be that fresh morning dew smell in Kentucky, and the sun is just coming out, and the fog and the haze of the dew is breaking out of the air, and there's just that smell. There was just something fresh and awake and alive and vibrant about that. So my response to that is like, yeah, this is going to be a great day, kind of thing. And so we can have very positive stimulus response mechanisms, and we can have very negative stimulus response. And so, as far as the positive ones, they self-reinforce themselves. As long as it's moving you in a direction you want to go, as long as it is supporting you, in a way, like for example, when I wake up and see those certain elements of a day and it motivates me to really go after the day and celebrate the day, well, that's positive. I don't need to change that stimulus response mechanism. It's really working for me. It's the ones that I really look for that are not working for me, just like I was saying with my wife in the arguments, are the ones I really want to work on. So let's talk about some tools and some ways that we can kind of break out of these stimulus response behavior patterns. I'll start with this little cartoon. I love it. There's two amoeba floating around, and it looks like a cell, and the husband amoeba is sitting on the couch and watching TV, and the woman amoeba is arguing. She goes, stimulus response, don't you ever think? Which is, amoeba obviously don't have a thought process. They just simply respond to stimulus. The whole concept of stimulus response came out a lot of the science, the test tube, the lab, where you've heard the old story of Pavlov's dogs, where he would stimulate them and they'd jump over the fence, and he'd stimulate them and they'd jump back over the fence to electrical shock. He'd stimulate them with food and all of these different types of things, and study these dogs. Now, we probably wouldn't do Pavlov's dogs in today's society because it was basically dog abuse, because he was using electrical shock, and there came a point where, when no matter which side of the fence the dog would jump to get away from the electrical shock, if he got shocked on both sides, eventually he would just cower down and would take the shock. And even when there was no longer a shock applied to the other side, getting shocked on the one side, he'd still just cower down and assume that jumping on the other side of the fence would just give him more shock, so I might as well just stay here and get shocked. Well, we make those same kind of things. As psychologists took that observation from animals and projected or applied that towards men and women, we found that oftentimes we do the same thing. We begin to just sit in a disempowered environment, in a place that's not serving us, much like the dog would sit and get shocked, even though by simply jumping the fence he could be free from that pain. His assumption that pain was going to be on the other side, once Pavlov had applied electric current to both sides of the little test facility, the dog just gave up in choosing and making the choice. He lost faith. He lost hope that making a different choice, i.e. jumping the fence, was going to make any difference at all. And that's really kind of becomes a really sad place to live when we sit in pain assuming that there is no choice, there is no option, there is no possibility whatsoever to break free. So I'm going to draw a couple things here on the screen the best I can with my little pen and see if I can make intelligible handwriting here. I'm still working on drawing here. So I'm drawing a little line with a little dash, and this is the stimulus. Okay, so on one side of the screen I'm writing a little just vertical line and then stimulus. Now I'm going all the way over to the right side of the screen, drawing another line, and I'm going to write the word reaction. I know our rule is called stimulus response, but I like to start with reaction, because typically most of us, that's where we are. We are basically reacting what we've learned before. Okay, we react. Okay, we do the same thing over and over. You know, my kids are in a thing called AMTC, Actors, Models, and Talents for Christ, and they've got this big, huge event they're going to do in January in Orlando, and they've got all of these boot camps every month, starting next month, where we're going to go back to Texas, and they're going to act. And what they're doing is they're practicing scripts, they're practicing monologues, they're practicing all of these things to be able to react them out. You know, they've already acted them and practiced them at home, and now what they're going to do is they're going to go on stage and react them. Well, there's certain things that we learn, much like my kids are learning these scripts, that we react to. This again is that stimulus response. It is that conditioning. You know, when the dog was first shocked, it reacted. Bam! Jumped over the fence. It didn't even make a decision. Its physiology literally triggered a jump mechanism for it to jump over a small fence over to the other side of the room, a little cubicle that it was in, and it would get a treat. And then boom, he had a little metal grate on both sides. He'd fire off a little electrical shock, and the dog would jump. And so it began to go from reaction to a learning behavior. But then when the dog would jump and it was shocked on the other side, eventually it reacted differently. It changed the dog's reaction. When he got shocked, he went from taking an immediate action to making a choice. And between stimulus and response, if we can, we create a gap. Okay? And in that gap, well, that's not an R. In a gap, we have choice. And choice is a function of free will. Now, we've got to have both free and will to make that happen. So between stimulus and response, there is a gap. Now, what happens in most of our societies, what happens in my relationships often with my wife, is there comes a stimulus and there comes a reaction, and the gap basically does not exist. Okay? When she says that certain thing to me, okay, when she rolls her eyes in a certain way, when I know the conversation's getting ready to go a certain way, my reaction time is literally in the milliseconds. You know, it immediately happens. It's not like I've got, you know, much time in the gap at all, because my normal reaction happens in milliseconds. So there's not a lot of time when you talk about milliseconds. When you basically talk instantaneously, there's not a lot of time for me to react. And so the concept becomes, how do we create more time? How do we space this out? How do we go from the stimulus happening, creating a gap of time, so that we can fill that gap of time up with choice? And the first thing becomes using our tools, okay? Using our tools that we learn in Envision. Number one, we begin to go into that place of emotional state. Immediately when the stimulus hits us, whatever that is, and again, in our business, it's usually related to prospecting, following up, thinking about making phone calls, thinking about our business even, and then whatever self-talk and different things come out of that, right? When that stimulus comes, what's going to come knocking on the door right behind that is our normal reaction. Okay, we're going to want to react. What we do at that moment is PBM or PBA. Hopefully you guys remember what PBA is, and I use this often. I don't usually, I'm so now stimulus response to PBA that I do it organically now without even thinking about it, unless I'm under extreme stimulus, and then I have to remind myself, pause, breathe, affirm. And what that means is when a stimulus comes, I pause and I breathe and I affirm. And I literally do that because I feel my thought process literally take off. It like leaves the station. It reacts before I even have a chance to think. My mind, my emotions just take off down the way they've normally gone. And so I have to pause them. It's like, no, stop. Because I literally can feel it. I don't know if you guys can feel it. I can feel it. When I get that negative stimulus, I can feel myself just going there, going back to that place I always go. And so when I feel that, the number one thing, and that's called a trigger, okay, in life, when you're wanting to really discover, lens discovery, lens removal, lens smashing, you want to look for triggers. You want to look for those things inside of yourself that give you the clue, that give you the insight that either something very positive is about to happen, so reinforce it, or something negative is, or a negative pattern is about to be triggered again, so do your best to stop it. And so once I made the decision, this is really important. If you don't really get anything out of this time together today, get this. I finally made a decision here in the choice area, in the free will area. I finally made a decision. I made a definition, really. I said, anytime I feel this trigger, anytime I feel my emotions taking off in a negative way, I'm going to pause. And that's the trigger event for me, because I can feel it. I bet you can feel it too. When you're about to have one of those moments with a significant other or yourself because of negative self-talk or whatever it may be, when that trigger, that emotional state fires, I've made the free will choice, which is really the whole concept of stimulus response. I choose, instead of to react, going back into my normal act and actions, okay, I basically make a choice in that gap. I make first the choice to PBA. I pause, breathe, and affirm. And I do that to stop my normal behavior, to stop my normal thinking, to stop that reaction, and to really buy time. What's in the gap is time. If we can get more time, if we can spread stimulus and response away from each other, we buy ourselves time. In that time, we then have choice, which is a function of free will. And with that choice, I make a decision. I'm going to pause, I'm going to breathe, and I'm going to affirm. And I'm basically like with my wife, because it's a really good example. I pause and I say, you know what? Number one, she's not attacking me. I start moving into those affirmations. She's just giving me feedback and her viewpoint, so I don't have to take this personally. Number two, this is not the end of the world. I'm making this bigger emotionally than what it really is. Number three, this woman loves me, wants to support me, and is trying to communicate something to me. And I need to listen and not get my panties all in a wad and take it all so personal. And so when I feel the trigger event of the stimulus wanting me to react, I pause, breathe, and affirm, and the affirmation brings me back into reality. The affirmation reminds me that what I'm thinking, that emotional state, is probably not real. It's imagined. It's a reaction. It's not a response or taking responsibility. And so in that affirmation, pause, breathe, and affirm, it actually buys me more time. And basically what that time is doing is opening up a door. The door opens for me, right? And what's beautiful about that open door is that that open door allows for new choice to happen. And when that door opens, I can walk through it and begin to make decisions that are different. And in that difference, now I go from the place of reaction to response. Okay? And a response means you actually think about what you're doing. And you make a proactive decision. You're no longer reacting what you've always done. You're now making a new responsible decision. And so how this relates to our business is when you think about, and let's just do that right now. Think about prospecting. Think about making calls today. Like, you got to make calls immediately after we hang up here. What's your emotional state? What do you think? Is it like, oh yeah, awesome, I'm pumped, I'm ready to go? Or is it like, wow, no man, I'm busy, I'm running out of the house, I've got a busy day, there's no way I'm going to do that, it stresses me out, I'm going to, what is the emotion that you have around the stimulus? All I did was say you got to make calls immediately after this webinar. What was your reaction? What was your response? When you think about building your business, do you immediately go into reaction, which leads to an emotional state? Or are you able to pause, breathe, and affirm and make a better choice that says, I've built up this story about what it is to prospect and follow up with customers, and it's leading me down a certain place, and I'm no longer really making a free will responsible choice. I'm really now just simply reacting based on old past stimulus. When I jumped over the wall and called a customer, they rejected me. Then I jumped back over the wall and called a customer, they didn't answer. And I jumped back over the wall and called a customer, and they told me that, what the heck are you doing in this business? And then I realized no matter which side I jump across this wall, I'm going to get a negative experience. I'm just going to sit down, much like the dog did. And we find ourselves doing those things because we think there's pain in every choice. There's no choice out. And that's what we call a lie. That's not true. It may be your experience too, and at the moment, but it's not reality. It's not the truth. It's just your experience, and that experience can and will change as you begin to make different responsible choices, as you begin to extend the gap, as you begin to explore the reality, and you move out of those patterns. New opportunities, new solutions, new creativity. What's on the other side of this door that opens up for us are possibilities. But what I've found is if I don't walk through the door, then I don't get the possibilities. My mind does not move into abundant creativity. But all the possibilities are on the other side of the door. But we have to pause, breathe, and affirm, make a free will choice, buy ourselves some time, and when we do that and we move into a place of response, what comes is creativity. What comes is solutions. What comes is a new way of thinking. And possibilities begin to emerge that weren't possible before. Ideas come that were not available before. Opportunities just happen. And it's one of the miracles of creation. It's one of the cool things that were built into the very foundations of the earth, is that if we ask, we'll receive. If we knock, the door will be open. If we seek, we will find. But we have to quit seeking the same thing, reacting. We have to quit knocking on the same door, reacting. We have to quit pursuing the same things we've been pursuing in the same way. And when the stimulus and the trigger comes, make a different choice. So stimulus response is simply that. And if you don't remember anything, remember this. When the trigger event, and this is the number one homework assignment, think about what is the trigger event. What triggers you to get frustrated? What triggers you to go into a negative emotional state? What triggers you to not really embrace life at its fullest? Once you have defined that, and just pick one, don't pick like every area of your life, pick the one thing in your business or in your personal life that really sets you down a negative emotional state area. Then pause and rewind the tape. Go back to the last time that happened and look at all the combinations of things happen. Was something said? Did you see something? Did you hear something? What did you say to yourself? What was the cocktail, the mixture of emotional state that started moving you down a negative path. That's the trigger, and then the first steps on a journey towards a negative emotional state. What you do at that point, when that stimulus happens again the next time, is you identify that trigger and you say that trigger's not going to trigger me to go down the same path again. And the way that I found that to really work is to close my eyes, really go back to that emotional state, feel those emotions so I know what it feels like, and in that moment embed a new thought. In that moment, and the only thought I'm embedding is, this is a trigger, this is a trigger. Kyle, don't forget, this is a trigger. When you start feeling this way, when this life's emotional navigation system, this lens, starts leading you down to a negative emotional state, that means stop. That's the trigger moment. It says stop, pause, breathe, affirm. And in stopping and pausing and breathing and affirming, I'm creating the gap. I'm buying myself time. I'm opening the door. I'm giving myself the opportunity for choice and free will to kick in. And if I leave that door open long enough, I go from reaction to response, and from response to possibility, and from possibility to abundance. An abundance of ideas, an abundance of concepts that really can make a difference. So, guys, I hope this helped you today. I don't want to go too far over our time. Stimulus response is a very, very, very powerful tool to really begin to make significant lens discovery, lens removal in our life, especially when it's considering our business. So your homework is this. Find the number one thing you don't want to do in your business. Think about it. What's the number one thing that's like, oh man, I got to do that. I got to make calls, or I got to talk to new people. Some people hate following up with coaches. It's like, man, I can talk to new people all day long, but having to follow up with coaches, oh my gosh. You know, some people are like, man, I love following up and coaching people in the business. I hate approaching new people in the business. Some people hate approaching customers, but are great at approaching, business prospects. Some people are great at customers, but hate business prospects. Find the thing that works against you the most. Stop, go into a meditative state. Really think about your self-talk around that concept. What are you feeling? What are you experiencing? What are you saying to yourself? Once you kind of have your own unique mixture, choose to embed that and call it a trigger. I literally call it a trigger. I'm like, Kyle, stop. This is a trigger. Identify this as a trigger. Identify this as a trigger. And I literally say it. I sometimes even say it out loud. I'm like, this is a trigger. Don't forget, when you feel this way, it's a trigger to get you to go into stimulus reaction. Choose to PBA. If you can do just that one in bed, what's going to happen, guarantee you, the next time that stimulus presents itself, whether it's outside or inside, whether it's you thinking about the situation or the situation from the outside presenting itself, you will remember the trigger. Now, you may not take action on the trigger the first time, the second time, the third time, but every single time that trigger will come up. And then eventually, if not immediately, you'll get the mental and the emotional will to pause, to breathe, to affirm. And then the miracle gap occurs. It's where the really cool stuff happens, where you begin to actually move into choice and free will, and things happen. So make sure you do that, and appreciate everybody being on the call today. I did record this one, so I'll get that out to you if you guys want to watch it again. Have a blessed day. Hope you guys get a lot done this week. I'm looking forward to our training call on Tuesday. Be blessed. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.